Well, first of all, thank you for coming. I appreciate y'all for coming.
Welcome.
Pleasure.
Yeah, we have had this conversation about meeting a lot of times before. I'm glad that it finally happened. And the topic that I wanted to talk about today is going to be masculinity, as you guys already know. The reason why I chose you guys is, once Brian, because he's just one of my best friends and he can talk about everything. Oaken is basically the same, can talk about literally everything. Kind of like a jack of all trades in a positive way. And yeah, Musa, because I met you at the public discussion back in 2018.
Yeah.
About self-care as a black man in Berlin. And that was basically the first time that I really watched like a discussion about that topic. And I think it was pretty unfortunate that it wasn't as interesting as it could have been. So I think it would make sense to talk about some of these things again with some other people. I also wanted to have like a female perspective in there, but I think since the topic is so big that you can cover it in like multiple episodes, I found it very interesting to have like a start just with a couple guys, like from a masculine perspective. What I thought about was basically, what was your first confrontation with the term of masculinity? Because I think that's a very interesting topic, and it might not like pop up in your head like, okay, that was that exact situation, but I feel like it is a thing that we are confronted with very early in our lives. So I think that's a pretty good starting point.
Wow.
What would you say?
Well, I can't recall the first encounter with the term masculinity, but it was from like very early, because I remember in school, every boy wanted to be a man, right? From very early,
right?
Like, and terms like, sentences like, "Oh, come on, be a man," and stuff like that were around from early, right? So it's always been a topic, but I think like consciously thinking about it, and thinking about or identifying your thoughts as being thoughts about masculinity came pretty late, to be honest. Like, I didn't properly think about it until we went to that panel discussion where you were on the panel. And
right.
As you already said, the feeling that we left with was a bit disappointing, because really there was a panel of like 7 or 8 people. And the only person that really gave me, as someone who's new to the topic, input was you. Literally. Like, the only person that I took information away from was you. So
why do you think that was? Is that because people were not really talking from their gut, or you felt, or
that could be one aspect, but at the same time, I really believe that it wasn't a topic in their day-to-day lives. It just wasn't something they thought about a lot. So
I would agree. I also think that there was like a language issue, because many of them weren't native speakers, and
do you know what I think it is?
They weren't able to express what they actually wanted to say, and I also don't think that they really thought about the topic before, just like Brian just said.
Can I jump in there and throw this in? Because I'm just thinking about how it came. So masculinity to me is something that was always put on you. It was there. What I would say is it's a set of rules or standards that it's like something you're driving on the motorway and no one's told you a speed limit, and all of a sudden someone pulls your car over. Sorry, sir, you've broken a rule. You're like, what? Like, there's all these, someone said, my dad died when I was 4 years old, right? So I get old, people are like, you need to be the man of the house. And I'm like, what? Like, what's that? Like, where do I find out what that is, right? It was this thing where it's all these codes that you don't know exist yet, or like, about how you've got to be with women. So you've got to like be a certain way, or like, you've got to be a play, you've got to be this. And I was like, what? Like, who wrote this book? Like, people are quoting things. Masculinity is like a set of rules that you don't know about, and people older than you seem to know what they are and seem to like kind of, you're like, what? Like, how am I supposed to adjust to that? Does this make sense?
Yeah, sure.
All these weird, and you're like, oh my God, like, what have I done wrong? Have I, man up, what? Like, I'm crying, like, I hurt myself. Like, what? Like, I can't, who says I can't do that?
The issue is that this set of rules is so ambiguous that literally anyone can pick and choose whatever it is just to put something on you.
Right.
Like, really.
And it's put, I think the key to me with masculinity is it's something which is put on you, and even down to like expectations of what men are going to be like. So as a black man, there's an expectation. I was dating someone and she was like, oh, like, and this is a black woman. She was like, I don't really trust black guys. I'm like, oh, that's come from somewhere. That has, her perception of that has come from somewhere. And we had an amazing relationship. But at the beginning of that, there was a sort of a need to prove myself. So that again was something I kind of like, oh, like this is something I didn't know about. And it was almost like masculinity it almost prejudged me. And I had to work out, as I found these new rules out, what would I adopt and what would I get rid of? And I adopted a lot of things that I shouldn't have. And I've spent actually many years getting rid of a lot of them. So now I'm left with what is, I think, mostly good. But it took a long time to get rid of that. Yeah.
Also, what I think is, when I think about children, like feeling the pressure of like adults or parents or whatever, that kind of force them to be masculine. I feel like that's very often the case, that you have like a father or something that tells you to be a man, don't be a girl, don't cry or whatever. And then from your perspective, as you just said that your father passed away very early.
Yeah, it was more of that. So then you're like thinking, there's that great lyric in the Nas, by Nas, when Nas says, I've got no dad, how's my older sister going to make me, I've got no older brother, how's my sister going to make me tougher, or something like that. Like, how about my sister?
Do you feel like pressure from your other family members to actually behave like a man?
Not so much family, but it's more external, because it's like the way that society is constructed is like, if the guy is not there, the family is vulnerable. It's like almost the wolves are outside going, look, someone is missing, someone important is missing, let's attack. So you're like, how do I stop this family unit being so vulnerable? And it's not like my family ever said that. It was almost like the external pressures of, you see it in black men, the way black men are, they carry themselves, sometimes in the street, like that kind of like, that tough mentality, because they're like, we have to protect the home. It's a very sort of primal thing, but it's, the second your dad's there, it's like, okay, how do I step up? And no one said that to me. No, my mum didn't say it, like my family didn't say it. It was something which you are conscious of from the surrounding culture, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does.
So it's
I was thinking about it yesterday when I was thinking about coming here today. It was sort of, and a question that popped into my head, which I don't even know if it even makes sense, but sort of, is masculinity gender specific? So in the sense that, is masculinity only something that men can be? Or like, I was trying to unpack and figure out what actually masculinity is.
Right. Yeah, that's
because
the first step, right?
That's the first step of like, okay, what are we actually talking about? Right. Is it just a sort of an attitude, you know what I mean?
Let's just find like a definition for us
right.
that we're going to work with. Yeah, go on.
And that's what I'm trying to figure out. I don't. What is masculinity?
For example, if I type in on Google, the definition of masculinity.
I think I remember the definition. I think it's really a set of rules associated with men.
Right, which will
like a set of characteristics. Sorry, if I'm not mistaken. I don't quite remember, but I think that's it. Basically, if we use that definition, it's not gender specific, because if we see those characteristics as being associated with men, that does make them exclusive from men, right? That means other genders could have them too.
And also then culturally, these characteristics can change, right?
Here we go. Masculinity, qualities or attributes regarded as characteristic of men. Examples: handsome, muscled, and driven. He's a prime example of masculinity. I mean, synonyms: virility, manliness. That doesn't. The synonyms. Other stuff. Yeah, virility, vigor, strength, ruggedness, toughness, robustness. I mean, that could be
pretty one-dimensional.
That also
that
could be
is
a lot of
pretty.
Women.
Yeah.
But even the definition, it's so funny how the definition is itself already, like, when you start looking at it, like, kind of crumbles.
Yeah.
Virility, masculinity, emphasizes strength, energy, and sex drive. I mean, that could be, I've got female friends who are off the scale for that. They could be like, yeah, I'm masculine. It's like, what? I had 10 dates this year. I'm more masculine than you. Oh God. Oh my God, I'm not doing any of this. Yeah, I mean, so it's like, I can see why there's people talk about a crisis, because it's like all these things, the second you start to interrogate what it is, it starts to fall apart very quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, when's the last time you did something you were like, that was a manly thing that I did? It doesn't really, when was the last time you gave yourself credit for doing a manly thing?
I mean, put in a new washing machine.
Yeah.
I think after puberty, I never had that moment, actually. I don't know.
I have had it for sure. If I'm honest, I've definitely had it recently. I've had it in a defensive sense. So I've had it in relation to, obviously the far right is getting quite, it's resurgent in Europe. I've experienced it as a dark-skinned black man. I think sort of standing up for yourself and knowing that those people are not really going to attack you unless they're in a pack. So it's almost a defensive thing. It's being frightening enough as a black guy, or as intimidating enough, they won't come for you. And that's the way I carry myself in the streets. If I say it's a manly thing, it's more like, and it's not a manly quality, but if I would associate things in a kind of basic traditional sense with what masculinity is, it's almost a defense mechanism. It's almost like taking the rules of masculinity. So what if someone from the far right is looking at me and going, I might attack him or I might not, what are the things that will make them think twice? So what are the characteristics they're going to look at and be like, I'm not going to fuck with that dude. So that's the thing, the way I carry myself, but that's not a positive thing. That's more of a kind of, that's like getting an SUV, or that's like putting on a bulletproof jacket. That's not who I really am. That's just an act.
Right.
So masculinity could be an act. It could be for a lot of people, it's an act.
Yeah, those traditional ideas of masculinity can have very harmful consequences for yourself, right?
Yeah, of course.
Because one, you're putting on an act, and two, most of those ideas are pretty outdated. Like you said, oh, I have to be the man of a house. Like, I'm 5 years old. What am I supposed to do?
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
That causes harm for maybe like the rest of your life, because you feel that sense of pressure. It builds up in you.
In relationships, it's been
in
really
relationships
affected
as well, yeah.
the difficulty in being intimate, because for a long time in my life, I've been like, I've got to sort this out by myself. The whole man of the house thing is, if you've got a problem, you sort it out by yourself. So at school, I got bullied really badly. I had the crap kicked out of me at school, and I handled it. Didn't take it home. I was getting bullied really badly at school physically, and I went and I basically sorted it. I went and had I was like, I've got to have 3 fights. If I have those, sorry. I basically was like, I have to have certain physical confrontations to sort this. And I went and I had them, and I sorted them. Each fight I've had in my life has been the result of racist bullying. I've been in 3 fights in my life. They've all been racist bullying, and I sorted them all. And my mum never knew about it. But that was the man of the house. He was like, I cannot take that home because she's got 4 other kids. She's a widow from the war zone. She can't deal with my shit. I'm a man, sort it out. That was why I first had this kind of like...
Oh, that's interesting.
Handled it, yeah.
What area are you from?
My parents are from Uganda.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's where you grew up?
No, I was born in the UK. So they came to the UK as refugees. And then they had me a few years after arriving. And they had me about 10 years after they arrived in the UK. And then I just sort of grew up there.
Okay. Because that's interesting. I've talked about that with Brian before, that we are pretty lucky in our situation, because we have not really experienced any type of like physical racism or violence as children or growing up. And I think it's very interesting to see how different that is in some cases. Like, as you just said, every physical violence that you experience was caused by racism. And I don't know, in my case, that really never happened. Also, maybe the UK is a bit different than Berlin is, but on the other hand side, I would say that the UK also has a lot more black people. It could, like, Berlin has potential for racism as well, or there is racism as well, obviously, but I don't know, I find that very interesting. Like, what would you say?
Well, I never had any physical altercations, but you do feel that you're different, though. You do feel it, but that's not necessarily a negative. Growing up here, it made me feel special actually. Like I'm happy that didn't build up. That thought of like, oh, I'm special, I'm better than others. Like that I didn't keep that. But that's what it made me feel as a child. But many people would disagree, right? Many people had other experiences growing up in Germany. But also, going back to the masculinity thing, we had some pretty interesting conversations because both of us mainly grew up around women, right? Like, and that, to me, personally, that shaped my idea of masculinity, like in retrospect, looking back at it. And I just sometimes looked at other boys and I'm like, what are you guys doing and why? Like, I don't get it. I mean, yeah, my dad was around, but most of the time I spent with my mom, right? And so certain ideas that I have about masculinity were different from other kids back then. So yeah, just thinking about why do you all have to do the most, right? Like, you know.
I remember hanging out with some. How can I say this? Well, it depends who's going to watch this, but whatever. Let me just be honest. I was hanging out with my cousins in my mid-teens. I'll never forget. They all came over from different parts of the world because my grandfather had died in '96. And so we basically all went and like met up, and so I think I was 16 at the time. We all met up and for this huge funeral because my granddad was like a big figure in terms of he was a dissident, a political dissident back in the day. So he was like really respected. A huge funeral, and so that summer we were all around like playing basketball, chilling out, and laughing and joking, and we had a great time. But there was one moment I'll never forget in particular where we were sitting around like this and all laughing and joking, right? But what I realised was no one was actually waiting. Not like we wait for each other to finish. No one was waiting for the laughter from the last joke to die down. It was like birds feeding on seeds. It was like everyone was just leaping in. Everyone was trying to be funny at the same time. So the conversation was incredibly like, it's so sort of macho. It was like, and I was like, whoa. And I remember just stepping back from going. I remember thinking, this is masculinity. This is what it is. People talk. I remember thinking at that moment, I'll never forget that conversation. It's the only conversation I remember all summer, from an incredible summer. But I remember thinking, this is not healthy. Like, this is like men, there were like 8 of us all going, joke. And I was like, whoa, hey, these jokes are really funny. What are we fighting for? We were fighting. We didn't even know. If someone stopped us and said, someone blew a whistle and said, wait a minute, what are you competing to like get to the top of? That was it.
Oh, that's.
Do you think like
interesting
this idea of competition or this competitive instinct that some would say is part of masculinity is coming from people wanting men to be like to always be the best? Like you're always told to be the best. You need to be the most athletic. You need to be the strongest. You have to be like the baddest guy.
Look at male society. Look how it's structured, right? Look at climate change now, right? We need a collective approach to climate change. We need everyone to chip in from all backgrounds, what culture, race, gender. Everyone needs to contribute, right? The problem is our society has been built on a cult of male heroes. Male heroes. You look at all these great boarding schools, right? These institutions. They're designed for the majority of men to basically fail, and the 10% at the top who've basically beaten everyone to death or whatever, emotionally or physically, will rise. Our society is structured on that way, right?
And individualistic as well.
It's very individualistic, and that it's been built around this competition. Like, why couldn't we all sit around and enjoy? It's this cult of like, for me to succeed, everyone else must fail. That's what I think this masculinity is constructed. You know, it's like people like Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson says a lot of things that people love, but the thing that gets me, that really worries me, is that he says this thing: unless you're having an argument with someone who you can't envisage like physically fighting at the end of it, if it gets to that point, then what's the point? You don't respect them. And I was like, wait, that's crazy.
Makes no sense.
Do you know why? Because, sorry, not crazy, but that's wild, that's delusional. Because one of the best examples of a father I know is my friend Sean McGee. His father has multiple sclerosis and has raised 4 children from a wheelchair and is the most incredible human being. And that person would never get in any kind of, but just the knowledge, the wisdom, and the beauty of that human being, I'm like, and you're telling me that's not a man in your hierarchy?
Right.
Yeah, because he's not,
That's
because he
crazy.
can't compete physically. Oh, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, just basically the thing that you're told that love or loving behavior is not masculine.
Compassion, right?
Like you're not allowed to show love, to show emotions, and yeah, I think that's like the worst misconception, because everything is based on love basically. Like a human life is happening because of love.
Of course.
And then I did this Instagram when you just have a question to your like Instagram audience, and I asked people or the people that follow me what they think about when they think about masculinity, and I have some people said funny things, but it basically just confirms what we just talked about. Like, masculinity is who does not fear showing his emotions at all. Then I feel like some of these are very specific, and you can't just generalize things. And then also masculine is who manages to accept and embrace the feminine in him, which is also interesting. But then again, what is femininity?
Yeah, I was
Like, that's also a question that I have for like later in the conversation, but I can also ask it now. Like, what are true masculine attributes? Like, are there any or attributes that are just masculine?
I think the main conversation we had up until now was what masculinity not is, and I think that is the key, right? Like, all the stuff that are all these attributes and characteristics that are put on you that are portrayed as being masculine, but they are not really necessary to make you a man and a person. And all these things, all these attributes, tell you what you should be. Really, I think like the concept of masculinity itself tells you what you should be to really fit a certain group, or even like femininity. Like, you have to be this or that to fit a certain group.
Right, I really love that you said that, because you also made a great point about growing up with women. I'm the same. Like, I have 3 sisters, and my mum obviously brought us up. So I kind of had this. You're growing up around women, so what I really learned. I mean, the qualities I have are things I look at. I don't go, am I masculine enough? Am I male enough? My question really to myself is, am I consistently making compassionate decisions? So if someone says, are you a good man? I said, that's the wrong question, actually. That's not a healthy question. The concept of good is not healthy. The key is to make a succession of good choices, or the best available choices, every day until you die. That's my moral code. It's not
beautiful.
Let me be masculine, right? Because you don't always get stuff right. Like, yesterday, someone said something. She was at an event, and she said something, and a friend of mine was really offended by it. Not offended. Offended is the wrong word. She was deeply hurt by it. Offended sounds like some Twitter conversation. She was deeply hurt because she went to this event wanting to have like really nice open conversation, and my friend made a comment that really upset her on a level which was not right. And so I went to my friend and said, look, like, you really hurt my friend by saying that. You said this and you didn't mean it, maybe, but that's what you said. And she left, and it was really painful for her. And my friend was like, oh my goodness, like, what do I do? I said, look, this is life though. Look, she's accepted the apology because you had the class to give it. We're all going to make mistakes. It's not what we do sometimes, it's how we recover. A good person, you're a good person because you made a mistake, as I have, and what did you do? You felt terrible and you put it right. That's all we can do. And that's what, it's not about being masculine, it's about what is the most compassionate thing. If someone comes up to me and says, I am non-binary, I'm a refugee from Syria, I don't have to understand what it's like
Exactly.
to give compassion. People talk too much about relating. I can't relate, so I can't understand. Wait a minute. I don't have to relate to a human. I've never heard their story to know that person needs a cup of water, that person needs a bed for the night, that person needs a kind word. And this is the reason that's my code, is because that code is much more healthy than a code of masculinity, where it's basically, at the end of the day, masculinity fundamentally is about, it's a win or lose. Like, I have to concede something. Men talk about, here's a man hug. I'm crying man tears. What they say, they're basically saying, I'm homosexual if this looks from a distance like I'm actually attracted to this person. I'm not a man if I cry if you think of what that is, when men talk about like these are man tears, it's very, no, wait a minute. If you're upset, cry.
Yeah.
You want to hug someone, hug someone. Who cares if you're homosexual? My friend had the most liberal thing about this. He said, because a lot of masculinity is tied up in fear of homosexuality. Yeah. And my friend had the best thing. Someone said to him one day, like, oh, are you gay? And he's straight. But you know what he said? He said, what if I am? Incredible response.
Yeah.
Because the person had to be like, and he couldn't say anything because he was like, he wasn't expecting the person to be, he was like, oh, well, because what, being gay is wrong? Like,
right.
So that's my code now in relation to...
That's beautiful. Honestly, that's beautiful.
It is. Also, like, people, like men in general, feel like being called homosexual, gay, is like the worst thing that could ever happen to them. Like, it's like even worse than being called like girly or feminine.
Right. Yeah.
Like, gay is like the absolute worst case for so many men, and I feel like that's funny because I kind of grew up not having a similar mindset, but like I was kind of raised in that way.
Me too, yeah, definitely.
And it just changed when basically I just hung around more people in Berlin, basically, because Berlin is like one of the most open cities when it comes to that. Yeah. And what do you think? I mean, it definitely changes, like, depending on what culture you're growing up in.
I was gonna say,
but almost every culture is kind of homophobic, or
I mean, I grew up in
which one isn't? Like
Ireland in the 90s, Catholic Ireland. You know what I mean?
I mean, wow.
You know what I mean?
I'm sorry, buddy.
Oh man.
To the point where when I was like maybe 14, it was socially acceptable to say that guys wanted to go around beating up gay people.
Yeah, of course.
Like, just sort of like, yeah, we're going to go. You know what I mean? It's sort of like, there wasn't even like, oh, it's sort of hush hush. It's sort of like, yeah, I'll say it because it's perfectly okay to say that. So I know for sure that, and again, that was sort of going back to the idea of masculinity being cultural and being sort of passed from around the environment around you. Definitely sort of impacted me in a way that I sort of started to replicate some of those sort of expressions or sort of things like that. And it was, even though my parents were not like that at all, and they would be like, you know what I mean, they would be sort of not in that same mindset, but the greater cultural surroundings still impacted me, even though I had that foundation at home, because that's how strong it was there. And I think it did actually really only when I moved to Berlin.
Yeah.
And being, you know, coming out of like the west of Ireland is not, it's not a metropolis, it's not, you know, it's not diverse like that, so sort of, yeah, it's...
Actually, can I say something? Because while we're here, I've just thought something. So I actually, you know, this will sound weird, I think I had a very privileged position on this because I actually came out as bisexual when I was 22. So the reason I say privileged position is because I lived basically my entire like early adult life as a straight man, right? So I had a girlfriend for 2 years at university. So I did all the straight things, played for the football team, whatever, straight, you know, like whatever, like straight male, you know, was into all that music, into, you know, very much a straight, like this was my existence. And then I, over a period of about a year and a half, I was like, whoa, I'm like attracted to guys. This is crazy. Like, I was walking down the street with my girlfriend and I was with, I'll never forget the first moment. It was me and my girlfriend and there was like this beautiful Indian couple walking towards us. And I looked at them both and I was like, she's really fit. Then I was like, I looked at him, I was like, he's really, and I was like, cool, he's really cool. And I was like, what the hell is that? Then I go home that summer and my sister is like watching children's TV and we're going through puberty at the same time. She's like 8 years young, he's 9 years younger than me. And she's watching like these children's programs going, he's fit. And I was thinking as she was saying, and I'm like, what the hell is this?
Wow.
I'm with this like woman who I'm in love with. I've been for like a year and a half and I'm like, what the... And it was the most horrifying experience because I'm like, my world was like, I'd had a tough life till then. I got, you know, gone through a lot of things, but I was finally amazing uni, amazing girlfriend, had a great job in the city, corporate job. I was like, yeah, like my career, my life is about to like... And I was like, you know, all this stuff you build to as a black dude, like you survive, you know, go out of like, you come through as a black guy with no trouble, nothing, no police trouble, nothing, like you kept straight. And I was like, and I remember thinking back on my years, I was like, you're doing too well. Like, something's going to come for you one day. And I was like, that's the one thing I can't handle. And I came out, and the most mind-blowing thing, so I had to break up with one of the loves of my life. You ask anyone, like, this was one of the greatest people I've ever met. Like, had to break up with one of the loves of my life. That was devastating. Had to tell her why. Didn't cheat on her, just told her, I was like, look, I think I'm gay at this point. She goes, are you bisexual? I was like, I don't know yet. I have to work that out. Now, it's taken me years to understand that's who I always was. I am bisexual, but I had to live it. And I said, to be true to you, I have to live it. So basically, that whole thing about if you love someone, you let them go,
Yeah.
I let her go. So to lose the love of your life and come out as gay in the same thing, it almost destroyed me.
Yeah, coming out can be a traumatic
It
experience,
was
right?
horrifying. And the double blow of it, to lose some of that and to come out was, I don't know how, I look back, I don't know how I survived it, but the beauty of the experience, looking back, was that I was emotionally intelligent enough to kind of process it on, like, what are your prejudices? And there was a lot of shame at first, not just at being gay, but the fact that I'd been homophobic before, because of all the stuff I'd said and done. And I was like the damage, because you adopt all these views that you don't really know, and you're like, I have to deal with them. So I went round and I apologised to people who I'd been homophobic towards. I actually found them and I was like, look, I'm really sorry. I never knew I'm just so fucking ignorant about this. And bless them, some of them are really good friends now. They all accepted the apology, and some I'm actually really close to now. So the beauty of that experience was I had to kind of rebuild my masculinity from scratch and throw out all the useless stuff, all the prejudice, all the kind of... So yeah, I've lived it. I properly lived it. And even the insult of being... I say this, like, I'm an openly, bisexual football writer, political journalist. And I see friends of mine, I say friends, people I know on social media sometimes saying really homophobic stuff. And I'm like, I'm a faggot to them. Or when their boys are in a room, they're joking. I'm the joke to them. I'm the guy they're joking, but I'm that guy they would beat up back in the day.
Right.
There are still places they're like, yeah, that's a faggot, beat him up. And I have to own that. And I do own it because it makes it easier for the next people. But yeah, I mean, it's...
You came out at age 22, right?
22, yeah.
How did the people around you react to that?
The reactions were incredible. The best reaction, a friend of mine said...
You were still in the UK?
Yeah, and he said, you have to tell everyone. Everyone has to know at once. I'm like... And he's like, this is the thing about these stereotypes about people. There's a Pakistani Muslim guy, I think I was his first close gay friend, and he was like, his immediate reaction was, that makes sense. I thought you hadn't been yourself recently. I thought something was occupying you. I could tell you were down. Then he was like, you got to tell everyone. This is not your shame to carry. Everyone has to know at once. You can't hold this. Everyone has to know. Bang. Brilliant.
Wow.
Brilliant advice. So it was just out. Some of the family stuff was more difficult, I can't lie. Like, I spent some time away from my family for a lot, I spent like a few, in our culture, to not go home for like Christmas is a big thing. I didn't go home for Christmas 3 years running.
Really?
Yeah, I didn't go home. Because I didn't feel fully welcome. So
Yeah.
and that's a big thing in our culture, not to go home at Christmas, because they're like, he'll come home for this. I didn't do it. Like, because some people were not calling my family, so I was like, I can't be around it. One person found out that I was, at that point I identified as gay more than bisexual, because I had to sort of explore and work out who I was.
Does it?
Yeah.
Do you think it makes a difference when you come out as gay, is that different?
Yeah, it is
It's very different.
As coming out as a bisexual person?
I think it's very different because
Yeah.
because when that conversation came up, everyone was only talking about homosexuality as like a binary thing. Either you're gay or you're straight. So bisexual people were invisible.
I think because no one believes it exists.
Yeah.
People told me when I came out that I was bisexual, it's like, no, I'm not. I must be in transition to something else, because you can't. How can you be attracted to men and women?
Yeah, that's people.
As it turns out, it's entirely possible.
Yeah.
Sorry. This is a serious conversation. No, but you can't believe it. It's so different. How can you be attracted to men as well as women, right? It didn't make sense. And then I taught years after I came out. I ended up hooking up with this girl by random. I was at a party. Very quick story. I was at this party, and my friend's birthday party. Opens the door. She says, "Hi, my name's Lisa," and I'm like, "Oh, hi." So we start dancing, And then she's like, she starts like dancing really close, and then she starts kissing me. I'm like, wait a minute. I was like, I'm a homosexual. I literally said, I haven't, because you want to be correct. You don't want to be like, leave people. I haven't been with a woman for like 8 years. And she was like, you're obviously enjoying yourself. Oh my goodness. So I know, she put bars down. So we ended up seeing each other. So just for a little, so I called a friend of mine, my friend Issy, who's hilarious. Like, Issy's one of my, like, great dude, great friend. I called up, I was like, Issy, like, I think I'm bisexual. And Issy, all he said was, they're like, we knew. We were waiting for you to work it out. My 3 closest friends were like, we were waiting for you to work it out. They'd just been sitting for years going, yeah, he's bisexual, like, why? But I had to live it.
Yeah.
You know? But it's such a wild story, isn't it? To go through all of... You know.
So when it comes to dating now, so if you date a woman now,
yeah.
How does that work? Like, you obviously get to know her.
Yeah.
And then when you reach the point where you tell her that you're bisexual, how do women react?
It can go either way. Because when there's a whole thing about, like, you can call it bisexual timing, but when do you tell them? If you tell them too early, they might have a stereotype. Oh, he just shags everyone, he won't be faithful.
Right.
If you tell them too late, it's like he's dishonest. There's no right time. So I tend to do it fairly early, right? It comes natural in conversation, but there's always a moment. I hate to say it, most dates you're on, you can just feel it like power down. You'd be like, oh, like, oh, how interesting. You know when you're dating someone and you start talking about other dates you've been on, it's like the date is over.
Yeah.
Because it's like they're not interested in you, they're not focused on you. You can feel the kind of romantic tension just evaporate. Because I think a lot of gay men and a lot of straight women are like, this is a threat. This is a threat, like, he's going to go and like... And actually, here's the amazing thing. There was one relationship I was in, and bless her, she's an amazing human being. It was a slight issue at the very beginning of the relationship, not because of her, but because of what she felt the society expected. And we were talking, and she goes, yeah, I got to admit, like, and she was lovely. She was so honest about this stuff, which is the key, communication. She said, I'm kind of freaking out because, like, you know, you're bisexual, like, that means twice as many people are a kind of a threat. And I said, the funny thing is, no one ever says to bisexual people, oh, like, you picked everyone, you picked me over everyone. You picked me over, I said, and you look how selective I am. I haven't been in a relationship for how many years before I met you, and I chose you.
No, I've thought about that before.
That's a thought that never came to my mind.
Listen, these are bars. These are scriptures.
I'll write that down.
It is, so.
That's
interesting. You actually picked the one person over everyone else.
I chose you.
Right.
And in most cases, to be honest,
there's twice as many people.
Yeah.
Right.
And you just...
And in most cases, actually, to be honest, the honesty is the key. It actually improves the relationship because they're like, oh my God, like, this dude is completely at peace with himself. And he's resilient and he's not shamed and he's not like... And that's really powerful, I think. People really respect that.
I was just thinking back to what we were saying before about how do we individually then... Because we were talking about before about what isn't masculinity, and now I've been sitting and thinking about what is masculinity, because I was saying when I came to Berlin, I sort of had to reassess what I thought you know what I mean, sort of like the things that I'd grown up around in Ireland, going like, oh, hang on a minute. I mean, I'd been sort of getting out of it anyways, but sort of going like, God, there's a lot of things that people do over there is not exactly the best thing to do. Like, it's pretty fucked up. And then I think recently I've sort of just been trying to reassess what I associate masculinity with. And with me, it's just sort of, and I guess it's a general idea, but sort of what you associate with your male role model. So that's why for me, actually, when I said installing a washing machine, because I grew up, like, my household was a building site for years. My parents were building the house by themselves. So my dad and my mom would build walls and they would do the plumbing. And so for me, the association of being able to be self-sufficient and not having to rely on asking anybody else to... So it does go back to this idea of self-sufficiency, but it's not this idea of being alone and having to do things by yourself, but being able to not have to rely as a... That
self-sufficiency is really powerful, isn't it, as a concept? Because obviously, like, you know, single mums are the most self-sufficient individuals in the world's ecosystem. But that I think you're right. There's something about the kind of male, like, handiwork, which is funny because I was going out with someone for a long time who was incredible at DIY. Like she was basically like a tool belt, and she was like, she would do the main repairs, and I would just help out. Like she was the strategist behind it, and this was a thing that like this was not a part of my repertoire for sure. And my mum, basically decorated, painted. We did it. It was quite nice. We did it together. We painted and decorated the entire house once, and she was an absolute wizard at like wallpapering, carpeting, like.
My parents were building a house, and there's a story of like, this is the west of Ireland. She built an entire chimney out of bricks. And the reason why it was so shocking, like it was so shocking that a farmer was walking by one day and saw it, and then 2 years later was walking by with some other people, and he pointed, he goes, "'Twas a woman that built that chimney." Because it was such a foreign concept.
Yeah, of course.
That to be self-sufficient was only men. Women aren't you know what I mean? So that's again, I was bringing it up because the idea of masculinity being assigned to one.
Right. Of course, yeah, it's wild. And actually, the qualities that I learned are the ones that I needed. The quality of being resilient. Like, you're not going to get anyone more resilient on this earth, really, than a single mother of like multiple children. That's the most resilient, because that person basically at any point could just decide, I'm not going to drive home today. I'm just going to leave these kids in this house and she kept turning up. To feed 5 people 3 meals a day for years on end. To find the food, to find the money, to find the time. That's absolutely wild.
I'm even struggling with feeding myself.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Guaranteed I'll have 2 meals today maximum.
Yeah.
Right.
And one will be liquid.
Yeah. Well, no, but I also think that women are generally more, like, I don't know, they're in generally not really appreciated for what they do.
Absolutely.
But also I think nowadays, especially in the environment that we grow up in, they kind of are appreciated way more. And especially, for an example, my mom, she owns a sailing school, and that's like a lot of the work that she does, you would say, is work that a man should do. Like because like also when in off season, all the boats, you have to take care of all the boats and rebuild them and fix them or whatever. That's like typical craft kind of stuff, and people are usually very impressed by her. But I feel like the way to get there, to being accepted as a woman in a man-dominated environment or a job, is so hard. And I also think it's so much different for men to like enter a feminine dominated environment, that I feel like they are way more like they are way more welcoming.
Yeah, of course.
Like I can't think of some example where a man moved into like a female environment and wasn't welcome.
That's brilliant. Like a nurse, like a male nurse. Women will not ridicule a male nurse. They won't ridicule a male primary teacher. All the things that men.
Like there is no bad blood at all.
Right. Yeah. That's exactly right. You put your finger on it, dude. Like there are so many professions that are stigmatized. If a man goes into a cafe and what are you doing? I'm training as a nurse. People will be like, there will be that thing for a lot of dudes. Will be like, he's training as a nurse, or it's like you've diminished yourself.
Like you said, male nurse.
Right.
So even the word nurse is female. You have to put male beside it.
And that's so weird because you don't even have, like in German we have like every word is feminine or masculine, or even none of it.
Right.
The word for nurse is by itself feminine in German. Krankenschwester.
Yeah, it is. It's Krankenschwester even.
Yeah.
Like imagine it's like sister.
But what is the word for a man, for a male?
Krankenbruder.
Krankenbruder. I don't even know. Right?
That sounds like a really cool rap name, the Ill Brother. That's like a really. It's like a crew. I'm the Ill Brother.
But then thinking of that, why would you say is that? Because when a female enters a male-dominated area, why Why is she not accepted?
Because it threatens the dominance.
Do you think she's a threat? Like, is she
Structurally.
Because it's like female comedians being mocked. People are angry at that because what are the things that men traditionally have been told that you have to be in order to get the woman of your dreams, right? To win the computer game of masculinity.
But do you think that they do that because of competition?
I think so, because it diminishes men. Like, this is the thing about masculinity being a zero-sum game. If a woman comes into your field, and to be a man, let's say you're not the biggest, you're not the strongest, but you're like, you've got the most money, so that's your bargaining chip.
Mm-hmm.
Because what she's representing, she's representing a world where women don't need all the things you spent your life building yourself up to be. If enough architects come into your world, or enough DJs come into your clubs, wait a minute, like, that means that when I'm going and chatting to a girl, what does she need from me?
Mm-hmm.
That's a threat to a lot of guys. Whereas instead of what he should be thinking instead, how about she just wants the companionship and someone to help her be the best person she can be, not even just professionally, but as a person. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm offering. Mm-hmm. But instead of, unfortunately, a lot of men, I understand as well, because men are not just, that's the society that judges you for that. Like, and a lot of the women you're approaching will have been brought in that same system. So they're also looking for these cultural cues. They're also looking for a man who can provide, protect, like, you know, in those traditional senses. And it's a deep conditioning. I'm not saying women, it's a conditioning, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like,
and it's threatening. So I'm not blaming, it's not blaming women, of course, doing their thing. It's like, that is a threat when a woman enters that world.
I think it's also a threat in the sense that because if it's a male-dominated area, then it seems like you have control over it. And if it's no longer male anymore, it seems like you're losing control of the you know what I mean? It's sort of like the same idea as in diversity, where people think, why people have to think, they're giving up something, as opposed to just not having complete control over it.
And it's
sort of the
also
same
the
idea.
thought, like, oh, they might not need us anymore, comes up too, right?
Oh, that's a huge part of it.
Yeah.
They might not need us anymore. Right.
Yeah.
Huge. And it's a legitimate fear because, I mean, what's this amazing stat I saw about when the wall came down? It was the highest internal migration of people in Europe's history. Women going from east to west. The east was quite a patriarchal society. And a huge number of women went to the west of Germany and never came back. And that wasn't because they were like rejecting individual men, that's because they were rejecting a system where there are expectations of them. And they saw it in the West, actually, you didn't have to. You know, some people like wanted to just raise a family, but some people just didn't want that. They were like, oh, I want to kind of like just, you know, do my thing and just. So these systems are like, and I think there's also the problem, these systems exist to benefit men, and they have collapsed fairly quickly. If you look how long men have had things all their own way in all societies, and in the last few, even like 150 years, things have changed dramatically. You could have gone for hundreds of years back in time, and it's like, women don't have the vote, black people are owned, queer people are invisible, and now you've got queer people are writing plays and, like, you know, they're winning football tournaments. I mean, this is horrifying for these
Prime
people.
Minister of Ireland.
Horrifying. This has happened so quickly. You can see why people who are very invested in that privilege, and I'm not invested in it, are terrified. And the great thing for me, like having come out, I looked at life as a straight man for a long time. So I was benefiting from a lot of privilege, right? So the beauty of what I went through was I can actually understand what I lost.
You've got context.
Yeah, I have I've seen it. I know, you know, I was, you know, basketball team, football team, whatever. I occupied a central role in a sort of straight universe, which I don't occupy anymore. Because there's conversations I'm not part of. There's WhatsApp groups I'm not part of. There's holidays I don't get invited on. You know it because you're different. You're drifted from those people now. Right. So I've gone completely off the path. So I know what a lot of these people are afraid of losing. Because you do lose. You do lose. But you only lose for a short time. And what you do is you go and find a better world. But most people, and this is the key, most people do not have the resilience or don't think they do to survive that transition. Most people look at what I've been through and been like, I couldn't do that. I have what I call the iceberg theory of bisexuality, which is in a circle of friends, for every publicly visible bisexual man, there are 6 or 7 beneath the surface in any given circle. because those men come up to me and talk to me, and they can't handle being openly bisexual. They're like, I couldn't do what you do. I couldn't live like you live.
What do they mean by that?
Well, because they're afraid of the judgment. Because they hear the conversations when you're not in the room, or they hear how people talk about queer people or bisexual people. They're like, I couldn't have those things said about me.
So they're not saying about anything about the actual nature of being bisexual. It's more the judgment.
I couldn't live with, the judgment. The stakes are too high. I might not meet that person. I might not marry that person. I was on a date with this lovely woman, art dealer, a few months ago, and the date was wonderful. And I told her, oh yeah, I dated like a guy back at work. I just got it, and she was just like, nuked it. That's what men are afraid of. And they're right. They're right to be afraid.
That's so crazy. This whole term of masculinity is so contradictory in itself. Like you said in the beginning, it is like whatever definition you put on it, it doesn't work. Like it's fragile. And I also have like one of these people said, like that was the same person in the same sentence, or she said toxic, fragile, supremacy, and misinterpreted. And I feel like that's, I kind of get what she says.
Of course.
But it's still kind of contradictory in itself, what she says. Like this misinterpreted thing is kind of for us, and the other thing is like against us. And then also when it comes to this term of toxic masculinity, I don't like the term, but I also don't really know what exactly it stands for. Like,
I've got thoughts on it, but I'll let someone else speak first.
I mean, to me, I think toxic masculinity is just when the advantages of masculinity are used at the cost of other people. So where the benefits that you have from being a man, and therefore the things that are attributed to being a man, stereotypically. So I think that's also the thing, is going back to the sort of the stereotypical or traditional understanding of what masculinity is, and then almost I think then men taking that to the extreme, sort of the idea of strength and sort of stuff like that, and pushing it to the point where they're also now negatively affecting those around them. That's what I think toxic masculinity is. It's not necessarily any attribute in itself. It's the misunderstanding of the attribute.
Right.
It's the idea of like, yes, it's good to be strong. It's not good to be strong to the point where you make people are in pain, or emotionally or physically. This idea of that you are overimposing yourself, or...
So also when you have like people doing things and then justifying it by being masculine.
I don't even know if it's a conscious sort of justification. I think it's just sort of going back to the whole idea of sort of, you know, you're raised to think that masculinity is a certain way, and then you want to be a better man. So you try to do, you know, I think, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but that's how I would sort of see it.
No, I think you got a good point. I mean, I look at masculinity like I look at nationalism, right? These things have massive contradictions, nationalism and masculinity. The one thing that's consistent in them is, am I in or am I out? That's the only rule of masculinity. Am I in or am I out? And no one wants to be out, right? Nationalism, no one wants to be out because we know what happens to the other. So to me, when she talks about toxic and fragile, I think fragile is interesting too, because you realise it's so funny how much of it is hanging by a thread. You can be the most macho dude, you can lift 300 pounds bench press, but the second you kiss one dude, it's done. The domino is done. You're out. Sorry, you're not a man anymore? What, you kissed a man? Like, that's it. It doesn't matter. You could. There was one guy I was talking to online. There was when I first came out, there was a great website called planetout.com. I think it's shut down now, but they had a great sort of chat room. You could talk to people, older like gay men who'd come out, and bisexual men would just basically talk to young gay men and be like, it's going to be okay. And it was these men would go online and they'd be like, you go online one night, I'm really struggling with this, and the next morning you'd log on and there'd be people who'd written like mini essays to you saying, look, this is what I went through. One guy, I'll never forget, he was like a martial arts champion. He was like a 5 times martial arts champion in like the 70s or 80s, like in his particular discipline. And some might say, how do you know he was? But the dude knew his stuff, like, unless he was like, you know, he knew his stuff. And he would have the best advice about sort of masculinity and like how to conduct yourself and what to go through. And it was like, it was so beautiful. Actually, this is a positive form of masculinity, as in like, here are the things that I learned that were useful. Here are the things that were not useful. You're still a man, whatever that means. You're actually more. He said, well, what does it, because it's like, because you have to define what does being a man mean to me? And he was like, well, it's being true to yourself and not holding others accountable for your flaws and just doing the emotional work day in, day out. That's what being a man is to me. And that's not gender specific. It's not, but he was always kind of saying, make a new code for yourself. Here's an opportunity to discard all that stuff. You're free from that now. And it was really beautiful. Like that was a kind of, yeah.
For me, it almost seems like masculinity is sort of like religion in the sense that they both started off as this great way to give people guidance to be conscious and kind and caring people. And then it got so bent out of shape eventually that sort of the core idea is there.
Right.
It's to give us a guiding code to care about each other.
Right.
But then
and then it just got
masculinity
manipulated.
Seems like a result also of religion. Like
they go hand in hand. In a sense.
Many ideas of what masculinity is supposed to be are coming from religion.
Yeah.
What would you say? Because you have like you have a lot of experience. Like you've been in church for.
Yeah, I've been through, man. I've been through it all
for a while.
Maybe this is my coming out. I don't know. No, not yet. I'm not ready. Well, I would say there's. I wouldn't say there's a causal relationship, but more of a correlation, right? Because it's not that these ideas that were written down back in the days came from nowhere, right? They were already in society. So, yeah, it kind of goes hand in hand. I would say they wrote it down because that's what they thought at the time, right? And it affected people way after they wrote it down. So there's definitely a correlation, but I don't know if it's causal. I don't know if it's not. But it's true. Like we have 2019, and there are YouTube channels of like Mormon girls asking for men to rule the world again and dominate women, and the channel is called Redefine. They do crazy videos about, oh, women, you should obey your husband because of this and that, and we have to stay pure because of this and that. You don't want to upset your husband, and and blah de blah. So those ideas were written down once, and now they've affected us till this day. So in a sense, there's a causal relationship, maybe. Not quite sure.
You know what scared me about being a sort of straight man or identifying as straight and then coming out? The certainty that it gave me to be a straight man. That was really scary because that's what we're dealing with now in our society. Having experienced what it is, at least I'm a man, at least I'm a man, at least I'm a straight man. That is a very powerful force and we can't underestimate it. And I say that as someone that's sort of lost that certainty. The way that, you talk about this, a great quote about sort of it's not even conscious sometimes. Men are literally like, right, at least I'm this. Like, don't make me, I can be anything in this world, but don't make me a faggot. Like, this is what we're dealing with. This is why we're in a bit of trouble, because as we move towards more uncertain times, politically and in terms of environmentally, people are going to look for more certainty. And masculinity is such a kind of, it's so simple. We will fight, we will defend the homestead, we will break our opponents with iron. Like it's very appealing. You can see why the masculinity and nationalism are kind of converging again. Like,
because it's a way to create an identity.
Yes.
And I think a lot of the problems with masculinity is we don't fully understand what masculinity is. So we need a way to find to sort of contextualize it. So we associate it with certain aspects that fit in perfectly with things like nationalism. And then we feel complete.
Right.
Because if we feel like there's a missing piece, this masculinity thing, we don't know how to fix it, so we put other things in, nationalism or all this other stuff. I think that a lot of men, or not a lot of men, hopefully not, but some men currently are...
It is a lot. It's a lot. Look at Jordan Peterson, one of the most popular intellectuals in the world. It's very popular because Jordan Peterson is basically saying, his skill is basically to say, you're good boys, you're all right, the world is awful, like... You can't afford, because, all the things that a lot of men were brought up to think they could do, earn money, have a mortgage, meet a nice woman. You can't afford to buy a house anymore as a young man. You can't afford to, what have you got? You're still strong, you're still a man. Despite being broke, despite being exploited by capitalism, you're still a man. You're a good boy. you're a good boy. And there's something so powerful about being told by an older man that you're a good boy. This is why feminism has not got through to the Jordan Peterson fans, because it can't come from women. This is the brutal thing about it. Women could say the same thing, it wouldn't be as impactful, but the fact there's an older dude, an older white dude who throughout history has been elevated as wisdom from the back of religious days of the Pope. Our society is conditioned to listen to older white dudes as a fountain of knowledge. If an older Muslim dude said half the things about gay people that the Pope says, there'd be riots. They'd be like, oh, this is some... There was a bishop that said that like gay families basically equivalent to cockroaches a few years back. And this was endorsed by like, you know, one of the old popes, I think. And if the imagine if like an imam had said that. Someone comes out, some senior cleric comes out from Iran and goes, the gay family's a cockroach. Oh my goodness, the press would be, it'd be on fire. So Jordan Peterson's a very particular role. He's like a kind of secular, he's like a cleric going. He's like a Pied Piper, you know? It's going to be okay. Because you know what, and this is the thing, if everyone just accepted, there is an urge for millions of men to be told, you're good boys. Then we get somewhere. But men can't admit that. They can't admit that actually they're terrified. And because men can't admit they're scared...
Do you think that's ever going to change?
It has to.
Like, because when I look at Berlin, for an example, because I only have that perspective mainly. For an example, we watched this movie, Die wilden Kerle. Like, that was like the movie came out like 15 years ago, and it is like a classic for German children, and it's basically about a football team, like football, not like soccer football, and the movie is terrible when it comes to like the ideals and the values that are promoted.
Yeah, the whole storyline is basically about a girl wanting to join the football team, but she can't because she's a girl. And every social aspect, every social side in her life, really pushing or doubling down on that. Like her mom saying, "Oh, why don't you wear those heels? Why don't you go out with those girls? Blah blah blah." And even the guy's like, "Your bicycle is pink. No, like you're a girl, you can't play soccer with us." And then there's this one villain, the dicke Michi. So we got fat shaming as well, the fat Michi. And there's one song.
They also use gay like as a
there's one
word.
song where you know the villain does something bad, and then the song in the background is the fat Michi is just a faggot, right? And you can ask every boy on the street out there. Everyone watched this movie and had like, you know, a bag with the wilden Kerle on it and everything. And like watching back, things have changed. This I strongly believe
crazy.
that
is 15 years ago.
they wouldn't have published this movie in 2019. I strongly believe that. So things have changed, and they will continue to change. Like, all right, it's difficult to say that because back then I was a baby kind of. But even looking at my own mindset and how much it has changed in the past years, it's tremendous. Like I remember being my first time I was exposed to bisexuality, the thoughts in my head sounded very much similar to what we talked about earlier. Like, right, like, oh, there's, you know, more threats running out there, and what if she sees someone? What if she sees a girl at a party and blah blah and blah blah? All these thoughts run through your mind, but realizing that stuff doesn't really matter, and the person likes you for who you are, and like being bisexual doesn't mean that you're just wanting the best of all worlds, that you just like want to shag everyone, right? That doesn't mean that. It's just interesting to see how much my mind changed in the past years, even, and that's just because of being in a certain environment, being exposed to certain people who think a certain way, right? That affect my thoughts. Right. Yeah,
but then again, like with this wilde Kerle example, with this wilde Kerle example,
the wild boys
of this movie, we can see a huge change in Berlin or in Germany. But when I look to, for an example, the US, I'm like every single video that I'm watching that is in the US, I'm like,
Well, I also
And
think from our perspective, we still see things we want to see, right? Like
Bubble.
we're all in a bubble, even though some of us try harder to like burst that bubble than others. We're always going to be exposed to things that we're looking for, kind of, and but then again, by accident, different views kind of like insert that bubble, and you're being exposed to new thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, really, it started slow, and then I was around more and more queer people, forming new thoughts in my head, changing my opinion on certain things. But I think, what was I going to say? Yeah, I think we're still surrounded by the things we want to see, and I wouldn't say that it's so far away that like people are opposed to those kind of things, right? It's not like on the other side of the planet, right? People still around us, but we just don't really see them, I think.
How do you imagining yourself at age 70? What do you think is realistic? How is it going to be?
70?
70.
70. I have no idea. I
What
literally no idea.
Like in terms of
yeah. Do we still have enough time? Right.
Like,
That's
in
the question.
terms of change, because when I think of this movie, for an example, like these have only been like 15 years, 10 to 15 years.
It's hard to predict the course. If I learned one thing from 2 years of studying sociology, is no one can predict the future.
I mean, Shanghai is going to be underwater in like.
And I can only make a prediction about how I am going to affect the people around me, and that's not even going to be accurate, I think, if I do it now. But I can think about what I'm gonna give to my children, how I'm gonna teach them about topics, or what I'm gonna do different from my parents, even though I think my parents did a really good job. There are certain topics that just weren't topics when they grew up, right? So for me, being exposed to all these things, being exposed or interacting with the queer community, there are many things that I can teach my children, and I can tell them that this stuff is normal and there's no reason to alienate people based on this and that, right? So I can only make predictions about how I will affect my children and how I will affect the people around me, because I do want to educate people, right? But I cannot tell what is going to happen on this planet.
I would, going off the sort of from the personal perspective in the future, but I think for me, because of what I was saying earlier, that my parents were very much on that right wavelength, but because where I was growing up, the surrounding area, I think that's also the more important thing, is that you have to, it's not just I think that goes back to the whole idea of individualistic idea, is that you don't think just about yourself, but you think about the environment which you're in, so you try to affect your environment and not just your children or the people, that are directly connected to you. I think that's sort of, if we're going to change in the future, we have to be more broader minded, not on an individualistic.
Prediction. When I'm 70, and that's, I love that you said that, because I'm kind of taken off from that. When I'm 70, I'm going to be happy, healthy with a long-term partner. That's a prediction. The world will have entered a state of chaos several years earlier. What would have happened is, I would have spent my entire life, from this moment after we finish this podcast, supporting people who have the answers or who may create the answers. So that's my role now as a 40-year-old man, like in October. I'm turning 40 in October. I'm going to spend the rest of my life supporting people however I can on a community level, local, international level, who are doing the work. And the reason I say that is this, for me to predict I'm going to be happy and healthy at 70 with a loving partner is radical. Because optimism is a choice. In our society, optimism is a radical act. That's my first thing. Secondly, a lot of things we're worried about, a lot of the time we look at future, we predict negative things. We predict dystopia, right? Yeah. We predict everything's going to be awful, surveillance society, patriarchy, people are going to be running everything, and women are not going to have a say, and queer people are going to be marginalised, and abortion is going to be completely legal everywhere. But no one ever predicted Greta Thunberg would come along. Mm-hmm. If someone had said to you 10 years ago, a 16-year-old girl will be going around the world lecturing about climate change and would have a spectacular impact, and people would be striking. If someone had told you 3 years ago that there would be strikes worldwide every single Friday for climate, you would have said, no way. No way. So here's the thing. We have to prepare the conditions now on this conversation and later for exceptional people to come along. We may not be those people, and that's fine. It doesn't matter who those people are as long as someone gets the job done. And the last thing I want to say is about my prediction and why I don't think it's crazy. People always say, how can you be so optimistic about gender getting somewhere, queer people getting their place in the world? I say this. There were people, enslaved people, travelling the Atlantic in those boats, and they must have looked up at the birds in the sky and thought, one day if we could be like those birds and have the technology to fly like that, we wouldn't be enslaved, right? And they fought and they died and they got murdered and they got lynched, and they fought for a day they could not imagine that would come. They created the conditions for people to be free enough to create the technology and exploit it so they could be free. So what we're doing now is the world we're working in about like how we dismantle these harmful concepts of nationalism and elements of masculinity which are harmful. We have to plan for a world that doesn't exist yet. And we have to have full faith that somewhere along the line, people will come along, and it's not going to be us who will have the theory and the compassion and the structures to take this shit forward. So that's my prediction. It's going to be okay.
Interesting.
I'm with it. I'm with it.
I've spoken.
I'm on board.
Like prophecy. When they find these
We're gonna
tapes,
sign up.
300 years later, they find these digital footage.
Got nothing to add to that, to be honest.
Yeah.
That's, yeah.
That's beautiful. So
It is. That was like a slight goosebump moment, to be honest.
I've
Good
actually
job.
never had goosebumps. Like
You've never had goosebumps?
from something that was so touching.
Is
no,
it?
and
Yeah, because you're not
I've-
sensitive.
You're too masculine.
I'm too masculine for this
You
shit, man.
don't have any emotions.
Goosebumps? No, I just don't know.
No one even touched the fruit. That was a plate of meat.
Yeah,
It'd be finished.
I mean, at least it looks good, innit?
Yeah.
Exactly.
My friend told me the best thing with these is if you squeeze lemon on it.
Salt.
You ever had that? Lemon on watermelon, and it's like mind-blowing.
In Memphis, they put salt on it.
I even
What are you doing in Memphis?
have lemon.
Oh, she's based here? She's based here.
She lives in Atlanta now, but she used to live here
How often do you see her then? Twice a year? What?
once a year.
That must be the Skype relationship from the gods.
Are we?
I mean,
Not from the gods, unfortunately.
I think we're done here.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay, yeah.
It feels like the end. I think
your little thing at the
like
end was a
one
good
thing
ending.
that I wanted to add, like somewhere in between, but I kind of forget what it was
Do it
about.
now.
But when when I asked the question about what are like true man or masculine and feminine attributes, like these ideas about masculinity must have come from somewhere. So, like for an example, this larger potential of aggression. For an example, like there has to be like something biological that.
I wonder if we just chose those. Can I be really
You
cynical?
think so?
Yeah,
Like,
because
like,
we have...
also when we think about like, because I thought about, like, for an example, bodybuilders, yeah, when they do like these steroids and that, you hear a lot of stories where they turn extremely aggressive.
The
because
testosterone
of
makes them more
because of
aggressive.
these huge amounts of testosterone that they inject into their bodies.
Can I be cynical though?
And, yeah.
I think that colonialism has made us think this. What does colonialism do, right? People come in, and I'm not just talking about like white people, like colonialism as a thing, like whoever did it, whichever empires did it, the Muslim empires, like colonialism, right? It comes in, it destroys everything that came before, and then whoever's powerful gets to make the rules.
Right.
So those people can come in, they can meet imagine there's a peaceful society of builders. Imagine that all we do with our time is build, and the only time we use testosterone is early in the morning, and we go and we build, and we never actually fight each other, right? We never fight each other. And then all of a sudden, someone comes to the village, and we've built this wonderful building, and someone's like, I want their stuff. So they cut off all our heads, and they throw them in a pit, and they go, okay, this is what it is to be a man. And after 200 years, everyone accepts that that's just what you do, and no one remembers the builders anymore. Does that make sense? Like, and all these ingenious societies, like, you know, there's stories about like how the courts, queer people or non-binary people used to be adjudicators in certain societies because they had the elements of both spirits, like, you know, masculine and feminine or whatever. So they were trusted to have this perspective on life. It was
impartial, so to
yes,
speak.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah.
That was destroyed. So sometimes when we talk about masculine and feminine traits and like biology, it's almost like we have to deconstruct where those concepts come from, because the concepts of biology come from colonialism. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
like,
I was actually going to
what
say
physical force is used for.
it's the idea that it's masculinity and femininity is just purely because we've been conditioned to identify based on our gender
For hundreds of years.
So the actual idea is just that we're associating good qualities with our gender, whereas opposed to we're supposed to associate good qualities with ourselves. But we
like
identify
added
with
value
the
to it.
gender, so that then it just becomes gender associated as opposed to personal associated.
People might say, oh, look, people are animals. We're animals. Look, it's always interesting what examples people use, not you personally with biology. Oh, we're animals, we're animals, we're animals. Look how that animal slaughters that animal. No one ever mentions ants. No one ever goes, oh, we're like ants, we contribute, because that's not a helpful example for, like, if you're pushing a masculine agenda, like Jordan Peterson is, he uses lobsters. Why? Because that suits his thing. He doesn't talk about, like, gay penguins, like mating for life. He doesn't talk about that.
Matriarchal society of
Yeah,
animals.
right. So we're different creatures, and we've chosen to follow paths. And unfortunately, our society basically has been a society where people have developed really complex, carefully, like, you know, compassionate societies, and those people have been wiped out. Not because they were weaker, because they were compassionate, because they were better. Right. You can't tell me that society was wiped out because it was weak, just because someone developed a gun and decided to go and murder everyone, or turned up with an infection that no one ever had before and they died on first contact. That society's not weaker. We need to actually look at, like, weaker society. We need to actually look at the weak society, and, like, we need to stop talking about what it is to be a good man and talk about fear. Like, I feel like just starting something called the Fear Project, and everyone just anonymously goes, what are you afraid of? Not what it is to be a good man, but let's break it down further. What are you afraid of? People talk about biology making masculine and feminine traits. What are we afraid of? What are we afraid of losing? Really break it down.